Hello everyone, and welcome back to part 4 of the dementia series, where we're going to talk about Alzheimer's disease specifically. So this is titled All About Alzheimer's, and I thought a great way to do that is to use the Alzheimer's Association website. That way that you can have this resource to use on your own. So this is a really excellent website. The address is www.alz.org. It has a 24/7 helpline, this 800 number you can call anytime as a person with Alzheimer's or a caregiver or just a curious individual. They are there, like I said, 24/7 to answer questions, offer support, get you help. Anything. You can find local resources on this website, support groups, education opportunities, fundraisers, anything like that. So we're going to use this website to kind of navigate through our talk for today. Now, we've already talked about different types of dementia, different disease processes, and I just wanted to give you some information specific to Alzheimer's disease, so to clear up any confusion or anything like that. So what we will start with, let me see, so we're going to go up here to the About Alzheimer's. We'll talk about what is Alzheimer's disease. So Alzheimer's disease is a progressive neurologic disease process. And what that means is there is a physiologic change that takes place within the cells in the brain, within the neurons, that causes the brain cells to die. What that process is called protein pathology. There's an overproduction of two different types of proteins in the brain with Alzheimer's disease. That is the beta amyloid protein and the tau protein. The overproduction of the beta amyloid protein produces the protein plaques, and then the overproduction of a protein called tau, T-A-U, the tau protein, results in what are called neurofibrillary tangles. The process of the protein plaques and the neurofibrillary tangles results in cellular death, cell death, brain cell death, loss of brain cells, and eventually leads to atrophy. Alzheimer's disease has a specific and predictable pattern. It starts in a certain place and progresses in a predictable pattern. So it starts in the middle temporal lobe. So your temporal lobe, if you remember the picture of the brain, your temporal lobes are over here. They hang out right above your ears. And Alzheimer's disease starts in the middle brain, or the subcortical regions, with right beneath the temporal lobes, or what's called medial temporal region. And it progresses from the temporal lobes to the parietal lobes and into the frontal lobes as well. Of course, it eventually spreads throughout the brain, but that is the pattern that is used to diagnose Alzheimer's disease specifically. Now, it can continue on into the visual cortex or the occipital lobe, but typically the visual cortex is relatively spared throughout the process, or it is in the very, very end stages. Okay. So as we know, there are two main new treatment options as far as for Alzheimer's dementia. They're FDA approved. They're the IV infusions that we talked about, and what they do is they remove the beta amyloid proteins. Now, they are not without risk, so you must speak with your doctor about risks and benefits and decide what is the better option for you. If you decide that the risks are too great, then there are other options for managing your current conditions. You have a few different drugs like Aricept, Namenda, Exelon, and what those do is they help the unaffected portions of your brain work better. So they increase neurotransmission or give you optimal neurotransmission. Let's see here. Alzheimer's disease does get worse over time, even though there are treatment options for management, and even the IV infusion, it slows the progression by by eliminating the protein plaque pathology. It does not stop it completely, and you still have the tangles and still have the progression of the disease even once the protein is removed. It's just slowed down. So it has no cure. It is progressive. Symptoms of Alzheimer's disease typically start with memory loss, or having disorganized or disoriented symptoms, losing track of time, forgetting where you are, losing the ability to navigate from one place to another, even familiar places. Completing familiar tasks become difficult. You lose the ability to sequence tasks like completing balancing your checkbook, or following a recipe that you've done several times. Just the sequencing of tasks becomes extremely difficult. So as we've talked about before, just the cognitive function altogether, while it is memory is required for many different cognitive functions, organization, problem solving, decision making, navigation, different things. Cognitive function is as a whole is much more than just loss of memory. For instance, once the disease progresses into the language center of the brain to where word finding is affected, many people, when they lose the ability to come up with the word that they're trying to retrieve, then they think, I forgot the word. Well, you didn't forget. It's not a memory issue. It's a language expression. The part of your brain that retrieves the word you need and then expresses it verbally, that part of the brain is not communicating well and not functioning. So while there is a huge memory component, there are other cognitive functions that experience deficit during a neurologic disease process like Alzheimer's. All right. So we went over all of that. There is a early signs and symptoms. This is a good one to talk about. Kind of how to know what is different from what is considered normal aging, what is considered the normal aging process versus what is potentially Alzheimer's disease. And pretty much the rule of thumb is, if anything that changes the way your daily life looks, if your memory deficits are changing the way you're able to function in activities of daily living, then it's probably a pathological situation or a deficit disordered situation. So if you're having to stop managing your own finances, stop managing your own medications, if you're having to quit your job, then it's probably an indication that there is a real issue going on. It's not just the normal part of aging. If you have trouble with any disruptions in your routine or environment, like going on trips, being displaced from your familiar environment, or getting very disoriented or overstimulated, easily overstimulated during, an unplanned event. If your daughter pops over and says, "Hey mom, let's go to lunch," and go to a new place that you've never been, and it's just very overwhelming, and you start having lots of fear and anxiety associated with, if you're going to fail in these new plans, and just the inability to problem solve through a new situation. That's when it's time to consider that maybe you need to see your doctor. Difficulty completing familiar tasks. This is where you've driven to the same grocery store, same bank, same post office, in the same town for the past 50 years, and all of a sudden you get turned around, on a familiar route. So, forgetting how to prepare a meal that you've prepared 1,000 times. You just kind of, if you start to try to think through the process, you lose track of, familiar things. Becoming disoriented to time and place. And like I said, this is more than just momentarily forgetting what the day is, or, if it just turned from March to April, are we in April yet? What is this? Because I understand once you're retired, or, if you're not in a situation, if you don't do things every day that orients you to the time, the month, the date, things like that, then you can, take a few minutes to try to figure that out. But you should be able to figure it out with a little bit of thought. But being completely disoriented, or forgetting, that it's a major holiday coming up, or, perseverating, not being able to really differentiate between what's happening right now versus future plans. So this is like if you were to tell your loved one that you have a wedding coming up, your daughter's getting married or something like that, and then the next day you see them and they're ready for the wedding, and you're like, "Oh, no, mom, remember the wedding's in June. It's in June." And then pretty much until that wedding happens, and then until after the wedding, there will be a hyperfixation, a perseveration on, we've got to go to the wedding, I've got to get to the wedding, I need to dress for the wedding. Just an inability to kind of manage that, now versus future time. And also getting turned around in familiar places, becoming disoriented in familiar places, and things like that. Trouble with word finding, and this is more than just like, oh, what's her name, the lady, married to Bob. No, this is, you can't find the words at all, and it's not like it'll come to you later. You're not having any kind of moment of clarity where you're like, oh, that's that lady, that's her name, or that's what that place was called, or that's what that thing is. You never have those. This is like you're constantly fumbling for the right word. And this is the name for this is paraphasia. And sometimes people who are experiencing a dementia process will have what are called paraphasias, which are, coming up with a different word, or having the wrong word come out when they mean one word. So calling a watch a hand clock, or they might even call it, a bracelet for, and circumlocute, kind of describe it like, the thing with the time on your hand. So that kind of thing. It becomes very labored, very frustrating. Losing things without the ability to retrace your steps is a big one. This is when we have car keys in the freezer, losing your shoes in bizarre places. And this is also where some of the behaviors start to creep up. People, because they genuinely do not remember putting things in in a strange location, and they're not able to retrace their steps and remember, okay, when I walked in the door, I walked over to the refrigerator to get something to drink, so I may have set my keys in the freezer. They're not able to do that. So in their mind, they have never had their keys, and somebody has to have taken them. So you get a lot of accusations at this point. You know, if you or your loved one are, you know, being accused of theft or moving things or taking things, then that could be an early sign. Poor judgment and decision making, just really bizarre stuff can come here. Withdrawal, you know, social settings and unfamiliar environments can become very overwhelming, very overstimulating, because there's just so much nuance and thinking on your feet required for parties, events, work, anything like that, that it becomes something that they would like to avoid, because they know it's going to create conflict. They're going to have trouble with it. And then, of course, changes in mood and personality. Now, this can be, as, you know, part of the disease process in and of itself. If you have this disease process that is, you know, moving into the frontal lobes, then that can very much create changes in behavior and personality. You know, the once sweet, precious mama might start just flying off the handle and be very bitter and nasty. This could be in response to, you know, kind of a defense mechanism, a defensive posture. They know that they're not able to do things, and they know that they're wrong. They know that they're confused, but, you know, they can't really accept that something is wrong. They can't admit, listen, something's happening. I feel like I'm going crazy, you know, things like that. So the outward response is to be angry and bitter and accusatory. And there's also, like I said, you know, a lot of depression and anxiety that can come along with this dementia process, just because the structures of the brain that stabilize mood and control emotional response to stimuli, those structures in the brain are being affected by the disease process, just like the rest of the brain. And so, like I said, there are a couple of different scenarios that can affect the mental health of the person, and early behavioral and mood signs that are associated with Alzheimer's. So that's all I'm going to go over with you today. I would encourage you to get on the website and kind of search around. You can read about the treatment options that we've talked about, facts and figures for, you know, what percentages women versus men, and different racial statistics, and what causes memory loss. You know, there's a ton of different tabs in here. You can come up here. This is where all your help and support is, if you're interested about the research particularly. It's just a phenomenal resource to use. So it also, as always, I am a resource for you as well. So please feel free to call me here at the hospital or shoot me an email. And I'm happy to discuss with you anything that we've talked about. So thank you for coming, and I'll see you all next week.